Peace. What's good? How y'all doing? Today is Tuesday, June 28th, 2022. I pray that this message reaches you all in the best of health, spirit, and mind. Let me just double check that I'm recording and I have my screen share on to make sure that everything is in order because I don't want to have to stop once I start talking. Um, I pray that this message reaches you all in the best of health, spirit, and mind. I'm doing really well. I am in my I'm in my research and my writing and my nerd bag. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm in a zone right now. And so I'm gonna capitalize on this energy and this flow of consciousness that's kind of streaming through me and really give you guys some high vibrational, thought provoking content. And specifically and especially for those of you guys in my membership channel, I'm really about to turn up for you guys because I'm very grateful for your support. And this is what I've always wanted to do. So, with that being said, yesterday, as I was presenting, I pretty much stopped half sentence in, or I wasn't presenting, I was talking to you guys, or we were having a conversation. And I pretty much stopped mid sentence because I wanted to stop at an hour and a half. The total video ended up being an hour and 42 minutes, but I stopped directly in the middle of my notes, so that we could have this conversation separately so that you could, process all of the information in the first video and then come back for a second breath, hopefully. So I'm going to pick right back up where I left off. And as always, just a reminder, you can access this full, I don't know if this is going to be 60 minutes or 90 minutes. I have 2 pages of notes yet, and I have a couple of references and resources from the autobiography of a yogi and the super beings by John Randolph Price and the Kybalion, particularly talking about the law of polarity. So between all of those things and a couple of references from my workbooks, if it's 60 minutes, cool. And if it's 90 minutes, then that's what it's going to be. But as always, you can access the full 90-minute video or 60-minute, as well as all exclusive ZaZaAli content by joining my membership channel for $22.22 per month. That's where most of my $22.22. That's where most of my content will be located moving forward. This video will also be available for purchase on demand. See the link in the description to access this and other on-demand content. So let's get right into this. The law of polarity in the Kybalion, and I'm starting with this in particular because I know yesterday, and really throughout all of my content, to be honest, I was kind of talking about race and specifically being lovingly critical of us, meaning Black America, meaning, Moorish Black America, Africans, descendants of Africans, the original people, the native people, the indigenous people of the planet. I was, when I went back and read through my notes, there's several points where I was very, again, lovingly critical of us. And I wanted to really kind of hone in on that. And this is something that I talked about in the video that I put up. It's on YouTube now, called the spiritual dichotomy of racism. And so this was really what I was kind of honing in on in that presentation. But I'm going to start off with that because I want to make sure that I'm clear in the point that I'm trying to make in terms of, the last shall be first and the first shall be last, right? We say that a lot. And the question is, what does that really mean on a spiritual level with everything that's happening in the world right now? Like, what does that actually mean? So in the Kybalion, chapter 10 talks about polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and like are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. And then it goes on to say, and I have certain pieces of this highlighted. Spirit and matter are the 2 poles of the same thing. The intermediate planes being merely degrees of vibration. Heat and cold are identical in nature, the differences being merely a matter of degrees. Light and darkness are poles of the same thing with many degrees between them. The scale of color is the same, higher and lower vibrations being the only difference between high violet and low red. Love and hate are generally regarded as being things diametrically opposed to each other, entirely different, unreconcilable. But we apply the principle of polarity, excuse me, but we apply the principle of polarity when we apply, I should say when we apply, we find that there is no such thing as absolute love or absolute hate, as distinguished from one another. The two are merely terms applied to the two poles of the same thing. Beginning at any point of the scale, we find more love or less hate. There are degrees of love and hate, and there is a middle point where like and dislike become so faint that it is difficult to distinguish between them. Courage and fear come under the same rule. In the same way that hate and love are mutually transmutable, so are fear and courage. But fear cannot be transformed into love, nor can courage be transmuted into hate. The mental states belong to innumerable classes, each class of which has its opposite poles, along with transmutation is possible. Thus, love is positive to hate, courage to fear, activity to non-activity, etc. And it will also be noticed that even to those unfamiliar with the principle of vibration, the positive pole seems to be of a higher degree than the negative, and and readily dominates it. The tendency of nature is in the direction of the dominant activity of the positive pole. And I'm sure you guys have heard people say, or hopefully you have, or you've pondered this concept that the universe bends towards positivity, right? So when we're talking about these different planes of vibration and these different levels of vibration, I'm going to reiterate the positive pole seems to be of a higher degree than the negative and readily dominates it. The tendency of nature is in the direction of the dominant activity of the positive pole. So Michael Beckwith said, love is the highest frequency and love always wins. So again, this conversation today is dedicated to and directed towards the anointed ones. How do you get prepared and how do you cover down over yourself and put on the armor of God, quote unquote, in spiritual warfare? Love is the highest frequency and love always wins. So let me backtrack a little bit because I want to make sure that I emphasize why in one breath I say we have to move out of race-based consciousness, and then in another breath I'm initiating race into the conversation, right? And it made me think about this. What was I listening to? There's this guy on Instagram that I follow. He's a comedian, but he talks about very trending topics. He's always criticizing Black women, right? He's one of those, I'm coming in the name of the Bible and consciousness and love, but 90% of his content seems to be focused on criticizing, and sometimes in a loving way and sometimes in a not so loving way, a lot of times in a very mocking type of way, right? Criticizing Black women. And so I stumbled upon one of his videos yesterday, and it was only it wasn't long. And I just was listening to him and I was like, I wonder, does he ever talk to people or address white people the way that he does his own people? And he's not the first one. There's a long list, you know what I mean? And not just making it a Black white thing, but just having the courage and conviction to be as strong and as adamant and as consistent in your criticism of all of us and not just one particular segment of the population, including Black men. And he's a Black man, right? So I want to make sure that I don't, you know what I mean? We don't have any misunderstanding here. I've been doing this for a long time. I've written books about how racism, white supremacy was the, sort of precipice to bring us into this place now where science and technology has been, they're using these things to declare war on humanity, right? So, but I just want to make sure that I'm clear with why I'm introducing race into the conversation while at the same time saying that we are moving beyond a race-based consciousness. So when you think about the law, the universal law of polarity, right? And talking about these different ends of the spectrum. So here's an example that I use with my clients. Whatever your life experience has been, if it's been tragic, if it's been traumatic, if it's been devoid of love, right? All of these sort of lower aspects of the human existence, right? Trauma, lack of love, um, poverty, right? Lack of social standing, you know, coming from a dysfunctional family, right? And then when you start adding race into the equation, all of those things just get compounded by 10, right? Being poor and living in a trailer house in, you know, Idaho is a different experience than living in a very small apartment in the Bronx with people stacked on top of you and all around you, right? And then you add gun violence, and then you add, you know, liquor stores being on every block, and then you add, you know, guns being dropped in your community, you know, and then you add crack cocaine, which intentionally targeted black people all across the country, which I talked about in the scientific intervention in our affairs, right? So there's been a very strategic, intentional, long-term scientific, psychological manipulation campaign against Black people in America in particular. And I'm singling us out because this is going to bring my conversation full circle. And in the scientific intervention in our affairs, I was talking about all of us globally, Black, African, whatever your whatever terminology makes you most comfortable, I'm fine with it. We need to stop arguing about semantics. We are the sense of urgency that is the world is facing right now and humanity is facing. It does not matter to me what you call God, what your religious preference is. Like, you know, a lot of that stuff is going to have to get put on the back burner in order for us to really properly prepare ourselves for what's happening and what's coming. So when you talk about these extreme sides of the polarity, right, the spectrum, if you think about those little, remember in the movie Boys in the Hood when Lawrence Fishburne had that little device, I don't know what to call it, but it was like magnetic balls that swung left and right, left to the left and to the right. There's a name for it, but I forget it. But it's basically showing you how, you know, one end of the pendulum swings left, then comes back to the center, hits the other, you know, ball, and then swings back to the right or to the other end of the pendulum. And depending on how high it goes to the left is what's going to start the momentum or you know, create the momentum so that when it swings back to the center, it hits the ball harder, and then the ball goes to the right and it goes up higher, and it keeps going until you actually stop it, right? Or until a certain amount of time passes. So in terms of the race dichotomy right now, when we say the last will be first and the first shall be last, there is no other national or global or, you know, country-based condition in the world that has been more dangerous, more oppressive, more deadly, more consistent, more focused than the war that has been waged on the original people of the planet. This is a fact. I can prove it with science. I can prove it with history. I can prove it with psychology. I can prove it with physiology. I can prove it with mathematics. So in terms of the pendulum that has been swung to the left for the original people of the planet, meaning severe suffering, severe oppression, and not just one country, not just one nation or one ethnicity, from the Dravidians in India to the native people of South America to the Afro-Mexican culture in Mexico to the original Aboriginal people in Canada to the darker skinned people in Japan and Europe. Of course, Africa goes without saying. There's been an extreme, very intentional war against our people for a long time now. which has put us in a certain mental and spiritual and emotional and physical condition. And maybe even if the whole entire world wasn't involved, we know that the whole entire world stepped back and watched, and that included some of our own. So this hundreds of years of processing of evolution and devolution is what it is. Add a D to evolution. So evolution is going right, devolution is going left. Devolution is going backwards. The undoing of the God consciousness, devolving, right? So in this devolving process, it has locked a lot of us into this race-based frequency, which is where we are now. So when you see Maxine Waters, shouting in front of the camera and talking about what Black women are going to do, that's a devolving of the divine feminine consciousness, which was originally credited to the Black woman. And on a spiritual level, that's the triple darkness of space, the womb. And on a physical level, we could point to the Black Madonna and Child. We could point to the story of Asar and Aset. We could point to the Orishas in Africa that had feminine deities representing different states of consciousness. We could point to the matrilineal societies, in the book of Ptahhotep. And I can't find my book, by the way. And every time I think about it, it upsets me, and then I forget, and I need to go order another one. It said that the Pharaoh, the most powerful king within the kingdoms, would go and sit at the wells and get knowledge and wisdom from the women at the well. So these are normal, citizens, so to speak, in the culture, where the most powerful king, he who has the ability to receive counsel from his damn, the word escapes me. I'm thinking Imhotep. His spiritual guides. That's not what I want to say, but that's what I'm going to say, because it's true. And of course, he does that continuously, but still found it beneficial to go and sit at the feet of the women at the water well. So this pendulum for the original people who had the codes, if you really study history from a spiritual vantage point, you understand that hundreds of thousands of years, these people already had the codes and the keys to life, right? Through trial and error. In the autobiography of a yogi, which I'm going to read in a second, Yogananda said that it takes 1,000,000 years for man to overcome or to master his lower self. And when I say man, I hope everybody understands, I'm automatically talking about man, woman, and child. We don't need to, have any setbacks due to gender. Yogananda says it takes 1,000,000 years for man to master or overcome his lower self. I'm going to read that in just a second. But the pendulum has swung so far to the left for the original or native or indigenous people that it's only a matter of time until the pendulum has to swing to the right and to an equal or greater capacity or height than the damage and the suffering on the left-hand side. So the last shall be first and the first shall be last. But the thing that we seem to have a misunderstanding, or the link in the chain that we have somehow, we think we can sidestep, is that you are the one that has to move the needle or the ball and start the momentum to send it back in the other direction. And once you gain a physical and a mental and an emotional and a spiritual momentum, now the universe is working in your favor because you're clear and decisive on what it is that you want in your life. Now the pendulum is swinging to the right side. where there's grace, where there's love, where there's abundance, where there's higher states of consciousness, where there's connection, deep connection with God, deep connection with nature, manifesting at will, speaking it, and it comes into being without any real effort. That is the frequency and alignment of God. How many of our people around the planet, in Africa and otherwise, have learned how to maintain that consistent rhythm and flow of life? I knew this day was coming. I didn't know if it was going to be in my direct lifetime, but I knew that it was up to me to set up the alley-oop for my son. And lo and behold, here we are. The gods are at war. Spiritual warfare is in full effect right now. Look at the mass chaos that's happening on our planet, the insanity, the stupidity, the ignorance, the savagery. Seeing video footage of pride parades with children in the audience and grown men walking around butt ass naked. I saw a video yesterday of somebody created a costume that was, the top of it was a penis. It was a costume, but it also had built into the costume between this guy or girl, whatever it was, their legs was a hole. And so when he or she bent over, the top part, which was the tip of the penis, was going into the, I mean, it's so stupid and absurd and sex-based, perverted sexual-based energy. And it's a different variation, going back to the variation in degrees of what we saw on the BET Awards. I didn't watch the award show, but I've seen certain clips, but I already kind of know what to expect. They got Black people in America locked in a low vibrational, sex-based, promiscuous frequency, because as long as you're focusing on having sex, you're not focused on being in alignment with God. So the last shall be first and the first shall be last. Those of us that have had the experience of the sharp contrast, the strong extensive swing to the left side of the pendulum. This is why the dark sheep of the family now has superpowers. You can't tell me I don't. I am 100% with going into my inner tortoise shell, so to speak, and not needing the stimulation of the outer world or conforming to this insanity for the sake of acceptance. Please. That's like a regular day at the office for me. The pendulum, with your impetus, with your focus and intention, coming through the abuse, coming and the individual and then the collective consciousness. So the collective is 400, 500 years of extreme insanity and abuse and chaos all over the world. This is why Satan is so powerful. He's been harnessing collective energy of African and original and indigenous people for hundreds, if not thousands of years. But the pendulum is not going to swing to the right side for the original or the indigenous people until we start to make the shift internally. That's what I'm trying to get us to understand. It's not enough anymore to be focused on history. We have to create history right now. The future belongs to the visionaries. The story of Hiram Abiff talks about a man who was buried in a shallow grave for a certain amount of time. His eyes had to be closed. He had to be cloaked in darkness, in death, and in destruction. What have we been experiencing? For a certain period of time, and then after a certain amount of time, he would be quote unquote resurrected. This is talking about Christ consciousness. Living through the heart chakra, living through the third eye. This is a frequency game now. So until we, the majority population on the planet, the dark the brown people, the dark brown people, the black people, the red people, the native people of this land who have the most accountability, the most responsibility. You are highly, you are expected to have a high level of input and of redirection in what's happening in the world right now. And what are you doing? Getting rocked to sleep by award shows, getting rocked to sleep by playoff games, getting rocked to sleep by TikTok videos, getting rocked to sleep by people online sleeping, by celebrities, by politicians, by trending news topics. Roe versus Wade has completely shadowed the recent murders of children in elementary schools. They're constantly feeding you with chaos and mental, and emotional, and spiritual stimulation. And when I say spiritual, I'm talking about the dark aspect of consciousness using, we want to help. We want to stop the suffering. We want to stop the illness. We want to help women get their rights. Women should have control of their own body. But now you're mass sterilizing women all over the world through Jim Jones juice. What are you talking about? What are any of you guys talking about? If you're not addressing that, don't say anything to me about Roe versus Wade. It's trending topics, masked as spiritual, wanting the betterment of women, wanting to help women. It's like the world that we've created in terms of this sort of patriarchal, linear-minded reality that has been built by men, initially white men, now men of the world of all races. Stop just blaming everything on him. It's time for everybody to take accountability, okay? Black men, you specifically. African men, you specifically. Native man, you specifically. Brown man, you specifically. You have a higher level of accountability. So yesterday, when I was talking about the dude on the podcast and all of these dudes on the podcasts, disrespecting women who have children, creating platforms that are based on disregarding or devaluing women, and then y'all following them, you're keeping the ball shifting to the left side of the pendulum. You are keeping yourself from being able to activate the higher self, to tap into the higher vibrational aspects of the chakra system. That whole point of being wired for well-being, when you are living your life in a way that is destructive to the minds and the state of consciousness of other people, you work for Satan, directly or indirectly. You might get a check, you might not. Doesn't really matter to me. So let me get back into my my notes, because I'm at 28 minutes already and I don't even I haven't even gotten into my notes yet. So I left off talking about becoming light in your affairs, right? Reiterating that point. And so, hold on, let me grab this. I'm gonna do the video on I am gonna do a video about the pineal gland. I actually started it last night, but so I can really get into the science of that, because that is directly tied into, these downloads from the upper echelons of consciousness, bringing that back up. When I said that, it rolled off my tongue so smooth. I was like, yeah, that's a whole meditation unto itself, right? But so mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically, again, just to reiterate what I talked about in the previous video, how do you become light in your affairs? Mentally, master the art of thinking and creative expression. We're here to create. When's the last time you created something that made you feel invigorated and made you feel alive? Spiritually, tap into nature and going back to how we treat the world, starting to make that your modus operandi.